Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan, and we post a video every week, so why not hit subscribe and the alert button so that you can keep up with our wonderful gardening adventures.
You certainly should. And if you've got a gardening question for Stephen, put it in the comments below and we will try and answer it in our Monday shorts.
Yes, so why not do that?
Do say where you're from, it helps context.
Yes, indeed. Today, we're somewhere quite different that we haven't been before, and we're looking at a group of plants that we haven't dealt with before, so I'm quite excited.
And they're very fashionable,
Yes.
and everyone loves them, and we are in the most extraordinary landscape and collection of these plants, which are, Mr. Ryan,
The Salvias.
ta-da! You might be able to see behind us, there's a pathway and a bower, and there are just salvias everywhere, every conceivable type.
Yes, and in fact, it's probably one of the most important collections of the genus in Australia, so we're very fortunate to be here, I have to say.
It's a magical environment. It's on a slope. There are incredible birds and trees and animals, actually, but we'll get to that. So what are we going to focus on today, though, Stephen?
All right, well, it's such a huge genus that I feel that we should probably give it at least a couple of videos.
Yep.
And so we're going to have a look probably today at salvias that like the shade.
Which, can I just say at the very beginning, hashtag surprised, I just assumed that salvias were all sun-loving, Mediterranean, love-a-bake, drought-tolerant. Well, we're about to find out.
Yeah, well, they're a cosmopolitan genus. There's well in excess of 1,000 accepted species, and they come from practically all parts of the world. So obviously they're not all going to grow in the same conditions in nature. So in gardens, the same thing follows through.
Well, there you go. I think what we should do is go and find Meg, this is her collection, and talk a little bit about shade-loving salvias.
Yes, let's do that.
Well, Stephen, as we wend our way to go and find Meg, give me a bit of Salvia 101. So where, why, how, what?
Oh, goodness me. Well, it's one of those huge genuses that in fact it's hard to say anything specific in a way. It's cosmopolitan in its distribution. There's a few land masses that don't have salvias. Australia apparently is one of them. And you won't find them in New Guinea and you won't find them in Scandinavia, but lots of other parts of the world have at least a selection of them. There's well over 1,000 accepted species at this stage, although there's a lot of new ones being discovered in South America, so the tally should expand substantially as time goes on. And they vary from flat-growing little tiny ground covers, completely herbaceous perennials, up to something that you could call a substantial shrub.
Which we have seen here.
Yes, certainly we have. And they are a group of plants that you can almost find a salvia that will do anything you want. And also virtually every colour, because most plant groups have a particular colour.
Pink.
Yeah, pink, yes. A particular colour missing. But salvia has it all. I mean, you've got red, you've got pink, you've got white, you've got blue, you've got yellow, you've got orange, you've got almost all the colours, including a colour that people don't think of terribly often for flowers, and that's brown.
Well, Stephen, shady salvias. Should we just go and talk to the guru herself, Meg?
I think that's a great idea.
Off we go.
Well, Matthew, I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine, and we've known each other for some years now, and that's Meg Bentley.
Meg, lovely to meet you. And first of all, thank you for letting us in. Your garden is extraordinary.
It's fantastic. I'm glad you're enjoying it. The birds enjoy it, and so do I.
They certainly are. I've never seen, actually, so many honey-eating birds in a garden that we visited. Actually, thinking about it.
Yeah, no, it's true, and it's all because of salvias, I think.
Yes.
We should get a few facts and figures to start with. How big is the property here, Meg?
It's about 7 acres. There's two properties joined, and the top half of the property is all for garden and salvias, and the lower half is for wildlife and bush.
And when did you first find this place and live here?
I came up here with my husband. Well, I came to live here first, and then we got married. I lived in the shed, and that was in 63 I came up here. And I actually brought a couple of salvias with me.
Yes.
And the first 3 salvias I had was Salvia officinalis, the cooking sage, and Salvia elegans pineapple, which had beautiful red flowers, which brought honey eaters, and Salvia Grahami, that it was called way back then, the old Graham sage, which had its name changed to Salvia microphylla variety Neurepia. So it was those 3 salvias that I noticed the birds loved.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, if that's so good for the birds, I wanted to get more salvias.
So your garden then, is it fair to say it's very much about nature, perhaps less so about the plants? I mean, obviously you're passionate about salvias, but more about creating a habitat.
It is a wildlife garden.
Well, we can bear witness
Yes.
to that. You've said that the kangaroos and the wallabies aren't eating your salvias, luckily.
They aren't. No, they keep my grass down, but they don't eat the salvias,
Well done.
fortunately. But rabbits, I have to fence off for the rabbits.
Yeah.
How many salvias do you think you have in your collection? And I guess we can be general and say species, hybrids, cultivars, whatever.
Yeah, the whole general gamut. There's about, I have had about 400, but I've lost quite a few because of the drought and through hard times. But I would say now about 350 to 375.
Wow, that is a lot.
It's still a pretty impressive collection.
That is, and that covers prostrate growing, small shrubs, large shrubs, up to 3 or 4 metres high.
Well, we'll go and look at some of those because there are some massive specimens in your garden.
I started planting salvias in spaces so that there was sun getting to all of them, and the wombat would just keep coming through because that was his old track. So he would also trample on salvias that might have been in his track. So what I had to do was put fences around the salvias but plant a lot more closer together. And then I noticed that each one that was planted close together protected the roots of the other one. So that's how I started planting so many all together.
Right. And what about seedlings? Anything interesting cropped up?
No, actually I don't have them self-seeding that much in there, but I do in containers.
Ah.
I had Salvia patens, which dies down, reshoots in spring, and I had that in a large pot, and it had died down, but there was a salvia growing in it, and I knew that that was not the patens. But I didn't want to pull it out because it would disturb the roots of patens. So what I did was tipped it out and found because patens has tuber roots, and this was a microphylla that had self-seeded in the pot, and I had to separate the two, pot it on the microphylla and pot it on the patens, and the microphylla turned out to be a beautiful rose pink one, which I had called Salvia rosalie.
Wonderful.
So that was a really good goer.
Well
so
done.
I was very happy with that.
Is it actually out in the trade still?
It's not in tray. Oh well, Salvia Study Group would sell it, but it's growing in the Botanic Gardens, and I've got plants here.
Can we talk about climate? So we are about an hour out of Melbourne in the Yarra Valley.
We're in the Yarra Valley. In this area itself is what's called a rain shadow.
Oh,
It's
and it looks so lush.
I know.
Well, it has been a dampish time in the last few weeks, but anyhow. So you don't get a lot of precipitation here?
I do not, no. No. I will have it raining up on the highway and you'll come down here and it's dry.
Wow. So what does that mean about your watering program here?
My watering program is...
You don't?
The soil is so hard I use mattock to dig.
Wow.
And make the soil friable, add a little bit of compost, and then I will pour water-saving granules or something in there just to help hold the moisture. Put my plant in there and mulch it up and pour the remaining of any fertiliser or seaweed, whatever, on top. That will get watered then for perhaps the first season, and then it has to be on its own.
Wow. So effectively, you're not watering any of this, only in the first year?
Only in the first year.
Wow. It looks so lush.
The gardens themselves I don't water, it's the containers mostly.
Yeah.
And that's why you'll see a lot of pots in amongst the gardens so that if I water those pots, the plants can get the benefit of any drainage.
Oh, anything that drains through. So, so it's not being wasted.
It's not being wasted, definitely not. No. And there's only tank water here. There's no dam water, no mains water.
Yeah. Well, you were telling us earlier on there was no electricity when you first moved here.
There's
you
no
lived by
electricity,
kerosene lamp. Wow.
Yeah.
What about frost? What about minimums in winter?
In the open areas, I will get some frost, but not real heavy frost. Some salvias might get burnt, but it's only on the outer edges of the leaves, and then they will recover. Some of the blooms on some of the taller salvias might get nipped, but it's I never cut when there's been a frost, and never cut when there's been a drought, or the plants will dry, but what's left down underneath that's protected can reshoot and keep growing.
Right.
So when you do prune, and I note that there's some salvias around here that don't look like they've had a pruning for a while.
A long time.
But when you do prune, is there a general rule about when you prune your salvias, or are you selective depending on which salvias we're working with?
Selective depending on what's available, what's flowering, and what the birds are doing. It's got to be always what the birds are doing. If I prune too much, some places you will find people will prune really hard and leave it. I will prune a spent flowering stem down to the next, because there's always flowers coming on the plant.
Right.
So it's a tedious job, but it's well worth it for the birds. So the spent stem is finished on any salvia, then the next lot come, next flowers. So that's why some you'll see very tall that have gone through the whole gamut of flowering.
We'll go and have a look at those. Now, I've got a personal question, because I planted this in a friend's garden. That beautiful silver-leafed canariensis, is it canariensis?
Canariensis variety candidissima.
So like a single lead with the flower. Now, with my friends, I did cut just the flower, the spent flower head. So is that the right way to treat that one?
You would do that with all of them.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, yeah. Well, I would.
Yeah. Well, I will do whatever you do, Meg, because you're the guru, the salvia guru.
In fact, one could say that Meg is a sage.
Oh,
thank you.
Stephen. And his dad jokes.
Yeah, I can't help it. I believe that you also get material from overseas. Is that right?
I have done, yes. I went on a trip to China with the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne with my friend Terry Smythe and a group of other people from different gardens, and we were over there for a month and looking for salvias. I was looking for salvias. They were looking for trees and shrubs, and I was called a mud sniffer because I was actually looking on the ground level for different salvias.
Wow.
So I was able to get some seed and get some plant material and put it through quarantine as I came back and got those growing. But then I found that the conditions here were so different to a higher altitude in China. So some we lost and some kept going. So it was naturally the hardier ones that kept going. But that was a very, very interesting experiment, actually.
Wow.
And the other connection was with the Chengcheng Botanic Gardens, where I had swapped seed with one of the horticulturalists there. And they asked me then if I would be interested in them sending me more seed, and they are growing in the Botanic Gardens as trial plants. I've got them growing here as trial plants, not to be sold. They're a learning, teaching thing.
Right.
So that we all get to know different salvias.
Wonderful. I'm going to just reveal to the viewers too that you do volunteer at the Botanic Gardens every Tuesday. So if someone wants to come and stalk you and ask you a salvia question, they can.
Yeah, and now they'll recognise you.
Definitely. Yes. I've even taken pruning tours around the garden with the horticulturalists to show how I would prune and how, well, I do the pruning there now anyway, but to show them how to look after their salvias in the gardens, because they're a new addition in so many places. Some of them are hardy, some are not quite so hardy, but it's a great addition to have in any garden.
Yeah. And salvias seem to be, pardon the pun, having a moment in the sun. They seem very fashionable at the moment as a perennial border sort of plant. I mean, you're seeing all of these hybrids being used so much, and I see them so much in gardening magazines and design shows about gardens, about border planting. You were decades ahead of the curve.
Well, a lot of people, and I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of comments that people say, oh yeah, but I haven't got enough sun. But the thing is, not all salvias need the sun. The larger leaves can take part shade. The smaller leaves and grey leaves especially like more sun.
Meg, thank you. And thanks for making us lunch.
Yes.
That's quite all right. You're most welcome for what there was of. That was wonderful. It was lovely to have you both here.
Oh, well,
It's
Fantastic.
a lovely day out for us as well.
It's a joy and a delight. Thank you, Meg. I had always just assumed salvias were hot, drought-tolerant, full sun kind of people. But oh no, I'm amazed to find there's this whole... And obviously, you made that point too. Salvias are found in most parts of the world.
Practically all around the world.
So it's a given that some will be shady, some will be moist, some will be
exactly.
cool tolerant, some will be drought tolerant.
Yeah. And I guess from an Australian perspective, most of the salvias we've engaged with over the years, be they the common culinary sage, Salvia officinalis, or dare I say rosemary, which is now Salvia rosemarinus, they're all Mediterranean sun-loving plants. So that's where that perception comes from.
Yeah. Well, we're about to prove that wrong.
Yeah.
But here's a sidebar. Look at this beautiful thing here, Stephen.
Yeah, which in fact isn't just salvia.
No, it is.
It is a plectranthus. And yes, there are differences. And no, I don't quite know what they are. But anyhow, the plectranthuses are another group of plants within the same large family that the salvias belong in. So they're quite closely related and often like similar conditions to the shade-loving salvias, I must say. So they're a great group of plants, but they're not what we're here to talk about.
And I guess just to throw another little spanner in the work, Coleus is also in the same family.
Oh yeah, there's in fact there's been a lot of work done in recent years about where everything belongs, and as some people are aware, and I alluded to the fact that rosemary is now a salvia. It used to be Rosemarinus officinalis. Now it's Salvia rosemarinus. But if you go back to the 17th century, there are records of rosemary being classed as a salvia even back then. So people understood the connection sometimes with plants, even if they didn't have the science behind them to prove it. Now we have the science and we have to live with the consequences.
Endless label changing.
Yes, exactly.
Well, let's get into the shade and look at some of these shade-loving salvias, Stephen.
Let's go.
Well, this is the most enormous plant.
Yeah, and you were just looking at the pink parfait and saying what a nice moderate-sized shrub it is.
Yeah.
Well, this is the wild version of Salvia gesneriflora, Mexican, fabulous plant, grows huge, wonderful shade of red, and this wild form has a green calyx, but there's also been some selections made, and we'll see if we can find one around the garden. One that I particularly like is one that's known as Tequila, and it has the same bright red flower, but the calyx, instead of being green, is almost black. And it's a wonderful combination, that sort of black and red combination. So I'd certainly be looking out for Tequila if I was looking for a garden plant.
Now, just for those of us who aren't so botanically aware, just show us the flower and the calyx.
All right. Well, the flower, of course, is the red petally bit, and the calyx is, in the case of this one, the green piece that's behind the flower. So it's the protective part that when the plant is still in bud and the flower hasn't opened, that protects the unfurling flowers.
Right.
So they're floral bracts.
And sometimes in quite a few salvias, those calyxes actually become part of its beauty.
Oh yeah,
they're
well
quite
certainly
large.
Tequila is a case in point.
Right.
In fact, because of the dark calyxes, it really becomes part of the beauty of the plant, as it does with Salvia aurea with their strange sort of fluted bronzy green calyxes. There's lots of really interesting salvias that it's not just about the flower.
Yeah. Now, again, so we're the other side of that large pitostrum tree.
Yeah.
This seems, well, it's certainly heading towards the shade. It's growing out of the light, which is really interesting, isn't it? So it looks very lolly. So if this is the wild form, in its natural habitat, do you think that's what it's going to do?
Oh yeah, undoubtedly.
Lean through.
Meg's not there to prune them.
True.
So they're very likely to loll through other plants and flop across the top of them. Certainly in a garden setting, I mean, if I was growing this in the garden at home, I wouldn't allow it to grow to this size. I mean, I wouldn't have the space to manage a plant of this huge dimensions. So I'd be pruning mine back quite hard every spring and starting it off from the young strong canes again and keeping it in a nice shady and preferably somewhere, a spot that might get a little bit of moisture, because I think they do better if they do.
Yeah. This is the most extraordinary plant.
Yeah, it's
wow.
huge.
All right, well, I guess from the sublime to the ridiculous, because there's some tiny little ones over there that are shade lovers.
Yeah, let's go and have a look at some of those.
Let's. Okay, so from the thicket to the bonsai dish.
Well, and actually it's rather funny because both of these species are actually Japanese.
Oh, there you go.
So somehow or another bonsai seems to suit. They're both yellow flowered. These are not in bloom, of course. It's got dead flower spikes on it. That is as big as this particular salvia gets.
Look at that. So it is
Ranzaniana, little yellow flowers, shade-loving salvia, and as I said, comes from Japan, as does the other one that Meg's got here, which is actually in a bonsai dish. This one is nipponica, which means it's Nippon, as in it comes from Japan. It's a variety called trisecta, so it has leaves that are divided into three main parts. And it's also apparently yellow flowered. I haven't seen it in bloom. It's completely herbaceous, so it'll disappear right down below ground level in the winter. And I guess some of these are serious collector's pieces.
very much so. But I guess would they be sort of woodland, almost ephemerals?
Well, they'd be woodland plants. I mean, they're herbaceous perennials, so they'd keep coming back again. They may not be particularly long-lived.
No.
Some of these plants are, you know, regenerated mainly from seed.
Yeah.
But because they're sort of herbaceous perennials, they'll keep coming back for some time. But they are dainty little plants, and probably only for those who love salvias beyond belief.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, there's another salvia that perhaps only your mother could love, which, well, no, actually.
No, actually, that one I think is actually quite
It's beautiful.
ornamental.
But perhaps for the collector.
Oh yes, still for the collector.
Let's go and have a look. Now, this struck my attention because salvias, again, I always thought were sun-loving and, you know, very particular habit in terms of how they grow. This just does not look salvia-ish. I mean, it does now, but...
The flower does, definitely. So this is one of the Japanese species called Salvia Kayam, and it's actually quite a showy little plant, unlike some of the ones we've seen, which are minute little fellows. Its foliage is handsome. Its flowers are a lovely soft primrose yellow. It has quite a long flowering period, and it would make a great plant in a hanging basket, trailing out of the edge of a large urn where you've got other plants growing in it, or just growing in a woodland setting in the garden. So it's herbaceous, it'll disappear in the winter back to its root system and then come back again. I don't think it would tolerate really dry shade, so it would need a little bit of moisture to keep it ticking over nicely. But it's actually quite charming, and unlike some of the other dwarf ones we've looked at, the shade, this one actually does, well, it has a bit of a presence about it.
It does. It's really beautiful. And I guess you made a film ages ago with Alexandra about shade.
Yeah.
The shade and the shade and the shade.
Yes.
And I guess, obviously, there is the degree of light, but also moisture.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, with the ones that we're looking at, is going to play a big role in which ones you can grow, because some of these will tolerate dry shade and some clearly won't.
These little fellows all come from fairly cool, moist forests in Japan. They need to be treated appropriately in our own climates.
Yes, well, there are yet more, so let's just shuffle along and look at more
Yes.
shade-loving salvias.
Yes, let's.
Another fabulous pink.
Yes, it is. It's rather a hot pink this time.
Yeah.
This one is the fruit cup sage, dorisiana from Honduras, about head height, so around about the 2 metre mark. I am absolutely prepared to bet that I can't grow this one where
Really?
I am. Yeah, I think the frost would have merry hell with it. It does have a rather fruity fragrance to the leaves, so I get the fruit cup thing.
Yeah.
And these rather large pink flowers. Now, Meg tells me that this is basically winter flowering, so it's just about at the end of its flowering season. And its foliage is quite pleasant as well as having lovely flowers. So what more could you want in a basically frost-free environment?
Yeah. And again, it's under the shade of the same pitostrum, so consistent.
Yep, shade all year round.
Would you say this is deep shade? How would you,
No.
Mr. Ryan, quantify the shade that this is in?
All right. Well, I would say heavy shade, not deep.
Heavy.
Yeah, because there is a little bit of light finding its way through. I would class deep shade as somewhere where there's actually no direct light getting through.
Right.
So if you were, for instance, say against a shady wall of a house with an overhead hanging sort of bit of the house, no direct sunlight gets in there and none of it can filter through anything else either.
Right.
So there is a little bit of filtered light getting through. So I would call this heavy shade, not deep.
Right, well, there you go.
That's my own definition, by the way. You won't find that in a dictionary anywhere.
It's the Stephen Ryan patent shade directory. All right, well, I think there's another bird on the...
on yet another
on
salvia.
the salvias. The birds here just love the blooms.
Yep.
Oh, stunning. Okay, let's not get distracted. On to the next.
All right, let's. Well, Matthew, I promised you another form of gesneriflora.
Yeah.
And this one is my all-time favourite, gesneriflora tequila. I don't quite know why it's named after an alcoholic beverage, but it has these fabulous dark calyxes, which I think gives the whole flower real presence, I guess.
It really is beautiful. And this is a very shady spot, actually.
It is quite heavy shade just here, and it's still growing, flourishing, and obviously flowering reasonably well. Yeah. So, yes, it's a very adaptable one for the shade.
Fabulous furry leaves and furry stems. And in fact, the fur, whatever we're calling it, the hair on the stem is the same colour as the
Yes,
calyx.
it is.
Beautiful.
It's that blackish hair that is actually transferring up onto the calyx lobes as well. So
well, what a great group they are. Shade lovers, amazing colour.
Yep.
And that colour in the shade really pings out. It's amazing.
It's fabulous. And when you think about it, there's not that many high-ranking flowering plants that will cope with very heavy shade. Clivias being one of the few exceptions, I think.
Yeah. All right, we have more to see.
Oh yes, let's go and see some more. Here we have another really interesting small trailing species, this time from Mexico, Horti-Culturalists. Its flowers apparently are blue, and it has these very pretty little pert silvery leaves. Now, Meg tells me that it will tolerate a bit of sunlight, preferably morning sun. These ones here aren't getting much of that. And they started in one pot, and it's been layering itself across from one pot to the other. So where it's moist and the stems are near ground level, they'll send out adventitious roots and start a new plant. So you can even end up with quite a number of them just by natural layering with this particular one. Rarely seen around the traps. I don't think it's available commercially in this country. Be interesting to know if it's grown in other places. And this one, I would say, isn't fully a shade lover, but it will tolerate comparatively shady aspect, which is surprising for something with silvery leaves.
Well, Stephen, shade-loving salvias.
Yes, who would have known?
My tiny mind once again blown.
Yes, well, exactly. And I have to say, I knew all about the fact that there were salvias for the shade, but I've been astounded with just the diversity and variety we've managed to see here in Meg's garden. It's been fabulous.
It is, and this is the most magical spot. It's full of birds, it's full of insects. There are wallabies as well eating things and rabbits, but it's the most magical spot. And I think, as we said, Meg volunteers at the Melbourne Botanic Gardens every Tuesday, and she's very happy for you to go up and say hello if you've got a salvia question, if you're lucky enough to be in Melbourne.
Yes, what a good idea.
But if you've got a question for Stephen Ryan, you should put it in the comments below and we will answer it in our Monday Shorts.
And don't forget to tell me where you're from so that I can get a sense of context.
Indeed. And if you want to know what we're doing next week, you are going to have to hit subscribe to find out.
Yes, so hit subscribe and the alert button and follow us on our daring do over the week.
Indeed. But we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.